Ai ka ardhur me ftesën e fllos Kosova. Unë përbëj shumë shkurt sot, se krejt ato që ka duheni ju më ndëgju, keni më ndëgju direkt prej personit të fjallë, po veç derisa mi falenderu USAID-in, edhe Kosova Private Enterprise Fund, derisa mi falenderu Ministrinë e Energjisë dhe Minjerave që e ka sponsoru këtë hapësinë sot. Edhe derisa mi tregu që mailing listat janë mrapa atje kur keni hy, mundi më regjistru lirisht të dalë ose të hy. Kjo ngjarje ka më zgjatë për 2 orë, kështu që nëse keni nevoja, dini ka dalë pa bo zhurmë edhe mos e ndërprerni lutem, ose nëse doni me dalë më herët, mos na pengoni. Me këtë rast po ja jap fjalën Richard Stallman, unë e kryva. Okay, Richard, please.
I didn't verify this. The topic of today's talk is free software, right?
No.
No, it's not? Oh.
Digital society.
Oh, it's a... good thing I checked. Gee, I wasn't expecting that. All right. We hear a lot of people discussing digital inclusion and the digital divide and how to enable everyone to participate in a digital society without discussing whether that's good or bad. Do we want to be included in a digital society? I don't necessarily want to be included. That depends on whether it's a just society that respects freedom or not. If it involves using proprietary software, for instance, you can count me out, because proprietary software takes away your freedom. So that discourse about the digital divide presumes that using digital technology, using the internet is always good, and it therefore ignores the issues that determine whether a digital society is just or unjust, whether it's good to be in or whether it's something we should try to escape from. I've identified 6 threats to our freedom in a digital society. They are surveillance, censorship, restrictive formats for data, proprietary software, software as a service, and the war on sharing. So I'll cover them one by one. Surveillance means keeping track of what people do. This is something that governments love. But in the past, it wasn't easy. In the past, tyrannical governments in Eastern Europe, some of them employed like 1/5 of the population to keep track of what other people were doing. It was very hard, and it was a big drain on the economy to keep track of everyone. But digital technology can create a paradise for surveillance, making it as easy as pie to record everything about everyone. Now, sometimes this is done using your own computer. For instance, Microsoft Windows sends messages with information about how the computer is being used. But often it's done through internet service providers. The European Union requires these companies to keep track of who people talk with for several years. Now, saving such data would be the best possible gift to any future tyrant, because that would mean that anytime one possible dissident is identified, all the tyrant's men have to do is see who that person talks to. And those are also possible dissidents to be investigated. That makes it easy. So, of course, if a tyrant gets into power, the tyrant can start spying on everything, but people will know that. They will know that they have to expect the government to watch them. But before the tyrant gets into power, they would have thought there was no reason to assume that they're being spied on all the time. But in fact, if they're using digital technology, if they're using the internet or telephones, they are being spied on. So, that's not the only way surveillance is done. Portable telephones are portable surveillance and tracking devices. Whenever they're sending out signals, the system is keeping track of where the phone is. So they know everywhere you go, and they can record that permanently, unless it's forbidden. And not only that, but as long as the batteries are in the phone, you don't know if it's sending out any signals. So if you really want to be sure it's not tracking you, you have to take the batteries out. Or just don't have one. This is why I don't have one. When someone told me that I might want to consider carrying a portable tracking device that would tell Big Brother where I am all the time, I just said, absolutely not, because it's every citizen's duty to poke Big Brother in the eye. That's not all those devices can do. They can listen to you as well. Many cellular phones can be turned on in eavesdropping mode, where they act like electronic eavesdropping devices, which is what they are. They can be told to start transmitting the sound that they pick up in the microphone without ringing, without showing any sign that they're doing anything. And you don't have to speak into the microphone for them to pick up the sound. They can pick up the sound from whoever is talking with you. Surveillance can also be done with fixed installations, such as cameras. In the UK, all car travel is tracked by cameras on the roads. Now, this is outrageous and vicious surveillance. And it has already been used to attack political dissidents. People on the way to a protest were caught and stopped because their car was tracked in real time by the police. So we can't be safe if surveillance is going on, and there are more and more proposals for surveillance all the time. For instance, the European Parliament is now looking at a letter where the members of Parliament are stating their support for a requirement to record people's search terms if they use search engines, and save these to be looked at later. Now, the usual excuses for surveillance are either terrorists or pedophiles. But in regard to terrorists, at least the terrorists that are not working for a government, which is what most terrorists are working for, they are a real danger in some parts of the world, but it's a small one. For instance, a terrorist attack in September 2001 killed almost 3,000 people. We don't know who organized that attack. We don't know if it was a bunch of mostly Saudis or if it was the US government or both, because Bush did not allow a proper investigation to be carried out. But let's suppose that it was not the US government, and let's compare it with an act of terror we know was done by the US government, namely the invasion of Iraq, which killed around 4,500 Americans and around 1 million Iraqis. So where's the real danger to anyone? It's from governments that don't respect our own freedom. And we mustn't give them carte blanche to do surveillance on us while they distract our attention with these other minor dangers. By the way, in September 2001, terrorists of some group or other killed about 3,000 Americans, and cars killed 4,000. But terrorists have been unable to repeat this since then. That is, those terrorists against the US at least. But cars have repeated it every month, 100 times since September 2001. So cars are apparently 100 times as dangerous as terrorists. So why don't we have a global war on accidents? It would make more sense. So that's the point. This is a distraction tactic. It's not completely false, but something comparatively minor is being used to get people upset so they ignore something more important. So we have to prevent surveillance. We have to prevent surveillance from being done with our own computers, and we have to prevent systematic surveillance from being done around us. Now, some people argue against this, saying that anybody could notice you if you walk down the street. And that's true. In a free society, we're not guaranteed anonymity. If you walk down the street, somebody who knows who you are might recognize that you were there. But this information is diffuse. To find it all is a lot of work. So people only do that work when there's a very important reason. And the people who are being asked if you were there, well, it's up to them whether to say that they remember you or not. So if they support the purpose, they'll say. And if they think the purpose is wrong, they won't say. And this also is a protection for society. But when a computer system is collecting information about us all the time, that delivers concentrated, pre-collected information about everyone for the use of those who have power and might want to use this information either for good or for ill. So, for instance, we might want to set up a safeguard. If we're going to have cameras watching cars drive by on the street, we might want to set up the system so that the only license plates it can see are the ones for which a court has ordered watching them. And thus, the rest of us, the system wouldn't record anything. This would be a real protection against collecting too much information. The next threat that I've identified is censorship. Now, censorship threatens our freedom. And once there is censorship in place for anything on the internet, it's very easy to extend it. For instance, a few years ago, a representative of the copyright industry said at a meeting in Europe, "We love child pornography because it's really easy to get governments to impose blocking of access to sites that have child pornography, and once they've done that, it's easy to get them to block something else too." Censorship of the internet is no longer limited to obviously tyrannical countries such as China. For instance, Denmark blocks a long list of websites, And that list is secret. They won't say all the reasons why they block sites. But the list was leaked and it was posted on WikiLeaks. Australia is proposing to block access to websites, but at present what it does is it forbids linking to certain sites. And one of those sites it forbids linking to, one of the pages is the page on WikiLeaks that has a list of the sites that are blocked by Denmark. In other words, information about censorship itself is part of what they forbid people to refer to. I notice a lot of people are leaving. I'm sorry. Oh well. But nothing can be done. It would make the speech twice as long if we tried to have it translated. So, the Electronic Frontier Australia made a link to a foreign political website and was told by the government it would be fined $11,000 a day if it kept that link up, because that site is on the forbidden list. So this form of tyranny is spreading around the world, and we have to be prepared to fight it. In 1970, China was able to censor the access of its citizens to information. And it did that by mostly cutting China off from the rest of the world, which had very large harmful byproducts. Today, China mostly succeeds in keeping its citizens cut off from the rest of the world using censorship administered by a lot of government officials, and it does so without the economic penalty. So digital technology, with its flexible, with the possibility of programming it to restrict many people under the control of a few, is very effective for tyranny. The next danger I've identified is file formats for data that restrict the users. There are two ways that a format can restrict the users. It can be secret or it can be patented. You may have heard of Silverlight, which is a Microsoft product which is mainly used for distributing video in ways that restrict the users more or less. Italian public television puts its programs on the internet in a format that's implemented by Silverlight called VC1. This format is a standard, so-called, and it's secret. The standards document is only available with a non-disclosure agreement. To get it in online form, well, you can't buy a copy, you can only rent it. That's how hard they're working to prevent the public from knowing about this so-called standard, which is being used by a publicly funded entity. This is obvious tyranny. There are also formats such as MPEG-4, which are not secret. The specs for that are published, but in many countries they're patented. That is, in the countries that allow software ideas to be patented. Typically, these formats are. There are actually many variants of MPEG-4. It's not a single format. It's a kind of container with specified things that can be used inside. Anyway, these patents have suppressed the availability of some programs that you can use to watch files in that format. So one way or the other, these formats restrict the use of whatever is written in them. For instance, most videos on YouTube are encoded in MPEG-4, and they have this problem. Today, if you upload a high definition video to YouTube, it'll get encoded in a new format called VP8, which is not restrictive. So if you're going to upload anything to YouTube, make sure it has at least 720 pixels across so that it'll be treated as high definition and encoded in VP8. That's the only acceptable way to use YouTube at present. So, when the things we say to each other are encoded in languages that we're not all allowed to speak, or more precisely, that our computers are not all allowed to speak, then the use of this information, the communication through this information is restricted. And that is not just in a digital society either. By the way, YouTube usually distributes videos in Flash, and Flash is another restrictive format, since it's only fully implemented by proprietary software. So, the next threat to our freedom in a digital society is proprietary software, software that takes away the user's freedom. The software that respects your freedom is free software, free as in freedom, that is. Free software respects the user's freedom and the social solidarity of the user's community. If a program doesn't respect your freedom, that means it's a form of digital colonization. It keeps the users divided and helpless. Divided because they're forbidden to redistribute copies, forbidden to share, and helpless because they don't have the source code, so they can't change the program. They can't even tell what the program is really doing. So this enables these programs to have malicious features that the users can't remove. Malicious features can spy on the user. They can be designed to restrict the user. We call those digital handcuffs, or DRM, digital restrictions management. And there are backdoors, which can be used remotely to abuse the user in various ways. And these are possible in proprietary software because proprietary software is controlled by the developer. Free software is controlled by the users. You see, we know computers do what humans tell them to do. They don't have minds of their own. They only do what people tell them to do. But which people tell your computer what to do? Do you think it's you? If you're running only free software, then yes, it's you. You have control of what the software does. But if you're running proprietary software, then you are not the one who tells your computer what to do. It's the software companies, the owners of those programs, who decide what they will do and what they won't do. And you can only accept it. You either take it or leave it. So either the users control the software or the software controls the users. With free software, the users control the software. The users control the software both individually and collectively in whatever groups they choose to form. With proprietary software, the program controls the users, and the owner of the program controls the program, which means proprietary software is an instrument that gives this company power over the users. Proprietary software is simply a system of unjust power. So what makes for a free program? A program is free software if you, the user, have the 4 essential freedoms. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish. There are proprietary programs that don't even give you that freedom. Their licenses restrict what you are allowed to do with the program. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the source code and then change it to make the program do what you wish. So this way, you are in control of what that code does, rather than surrendering to the control of the developer. Freedom 2 is the freedom to help other people. That's the freedom to redistribute exact copies of the program when you wish. And freedom 3 is the freedom to contribute to your community. That's the freedom to distribute copies of your modified versions to other people when you wish. So, freedom 1 means that you control the program individually. You are free, therefore, to change the code to do whatever you like it to do. So that if there were anything malicious in the code, you can get rid of it. Of course, more often we use this freedom in situations where nobody was malicious, but the program just doesn't suit you. Somebody else developed it, he wanted it to do A, and you want to do A prime, so you need to change the program some. And in both cases, freedom 1 is what gives you individually the control. But we also need to have control of our software collectively. That's what freedom 3 gives us. Because that way, if one person or a few people make a changed version of the program, they can publish their changed version and others can use it too. And that's how the people who don't know how to program get the benefit of freedom. Because there are a lot of users that don't know how to program, and they don't know how to exercise freedom 1. But when other people who are programmers publish modified versions, everybody can install them or not, as they wish. So everybody gets the benefit of living in a society where people have these 4 freedoms. And this is how we collectively as a society control our software. Because every user is free to participate in society's decision about the future of the program, because that decision is simply the sum total of all the decisions people make of what to do with the program. So if a few people make a changed version and they publish it, the rest of us could either use it and say we like it, or we can refuse to use it and say we don't like it. And the other programmers who are interested in this, the organizations that distribute this program, they will probably choose the version that people like. And so we all influence the future development of the program. And we can also do this working together in any group of our own choosing. So if you want to work with these people because you have common interests on a version of the program, you can do that. And meanwhile, if those people have a different job to do or have different needs or different tastes, they can have their version of the program which does what they like. And whether it's worth it to maintain 2 different versions or whether you'd rather join together and have just one version, that's up to all of you. So we can't possibly use computers and have freedom unless we're doing it with free software. If you've got a non-free program running on your computer, then some chains have been put on you. Now, you may not think about this because most of society doesn't encourage you to think about this. They encourage you to think it's normal not to be free, not to control what your computer does. And for the most part, people don't emphasize the malicious features that are in proprietary software. Of course, why are malicious features found so often in proprietary software? Because the users can't take them out. With free software, the users control the program and nobody has power over anybody else. If, and rarely this happens, there's some malicious feature in a free program, somebody will make a modified version which doesn't have the malicious feature, and everyone will switch to that. But with proprietary software, we usually don't have the source code. It's hard to tell there is a malicious feature, and even if we find out, we can't remove it. So the malicious features are a consequence of proprietary software in general. Now, these malicious features include surveillance, which can be found in Windows and in the Adobe Flash Player. The Adobe Flash Player is an extremely malicious program. It has something called super cookies. These cookies work like browser cookies, except that the browsers give users some control over what to do with cookies, but the Adobe Flash Player doesn't give the users any control. It's set up so that sites can communicate with each other through the Adobe Flash Player, and thus they can cross-identify the user and increase their surveillance. Another example of surveillance features, spyware, is in the Amazon Swindle. Well, that's not its official name. Its official name is the Kindle. For instance, if users make notes on books, those notes get sent to Amazon, and Amazon can publish them. So there are also frequently digital handcuffs, features designed to restrict what users can do with the files in their own computer. And these are found in Windows, they're found in Macintosh, and they're found in an even worse form in the newer Apple computers, the iGrone and the iBad. Because in those, Apple has gone so far to restrict the installation of applications. So people are not allowed to choose what programs to install in an iGrone or an iBad. They can only get applications from Apple's App Store. And Apple exercises very strict censorship of these applications. And there's also digital restrictions management in the Adobe Flash Player and in the Amazon Swindle. It's very common. And then there are backdoors, which allow someone to remotely send a command to tell your computer to do something that you may not want. Now, Windows has a backdoor that can be used to forcibly install changes in the software. Microsoft can do this. As a result, any malicious thing that is not in Windows today could get put into it tomorrow. Now, there's also a backdoor in the iGrone and the iBad. For instance, Apple can delete applications remotely. So if Apple decides tomorrow that a certain application is no longer suitable, they can forcibly delete it from everybody's computer. The Amazon swindle has a back door too. We found out about this back door when Amazon used it. That was in 2009. Amazon used it to forcibly, remotely delete a lot of copies of a particular book. And the book that Amazon used to demonstrate the Orwellian nature of its product was 1984 by George Orwell. A book you should all read if you haven't, but not on a swindle. Now, this shocked people. And so Amazon said they would never do this again unless ordered by the government. That's awfully comforting, isn't it? So Amazon won't make your books disappear unless the government says to make your books disappear. I want to have my books in a form that the government won't know about. I buy books with cash. Nobody keeps any records of what books I buy. But with the Amazon swindle, the only place to get most modern books is from Amazon. And Amazon makes the customers identify themselves, which means that Amazon has a list of all the books each user has bought. Now that list is a dangerous form of surveillance. It must not be allowed to exist anywhere. So our only defense against these malicious features is for the users to control the software. In other words, to have free software. Today, I had a meeting with the Minister of Education, and we were talking about how the schools of Kosovo could move to free software, because schools must teach exclusively free software. The use of proprietary software in society is a form of dependence. It makes society weaker and more helpless. So, to teach the use of proprietary software in schools is spreading dependence. You might as well give the students tobacco at lunch along with lettuce, and that way they can get dependent on tobacco and get sick. Or offer them needles full of heroin so that they can become dependent on that. The companies or the people that sell heroin will often give the first dose gratis. The idea is once you get dependent, then you have to pay. Proprietary software developers do the same thing to schools. They offer gratis copies of their non-free software to schools and students to get them dependent. But schools should not participate in that, because schools have a social mission to educate good citizens of a strong, capable, independent, cooperating, and free society. In the field of computing, that means teaching people to be free software users. Because free software, the use of free software is development of society. Free software is knowledge that's available to everyone to learn, so that people everywhere can understand it, and then they can maintain it and adapt it and extend it. So that's the topic of free software versus the threat, which is proprietary software. The next threat I've identified is software as a service. Software as a service is a new way to lose control of your computing. Here's how it works. Instead of doing your computing on the data you have in your machine by running a program in your machine, You send that data to somebody else's computer, and you're in that computer, and you don't know what, and then it sends the results back to you. Or perhaps it takes action directly for you. Well, the result of this is like running a proprietary program, because you don't control what gets done. The server operator controls what gets done. The mechanism is different. With proprietary software, typically you have an executable file, but you don't have the source code, which means it's very hard to find out what that program is really doing and almost impossible to change it. With software as a service, you don't get the source code and you don't get the executable either, because that's in someone else's computer, which means it's impossible to verify independently what's being done. Not with proprietary software, to figure out what the executable does is so hard that in practice it's not possible. But with software as a service, it's literally totally impossible. You don't control the computing. Proprietary software can have the malicious feature of spyware, surveillance. It can send messages with information about what's being done. With software as a service, you get the same result automatically, because in order to use it, you'd have to send your data to the server, so the server operator has your data. It's the same result as spyware, but without any specific code to do it. It falls out automatically from the architecture of the system. Some proprietary programs have a backdoor that allows someone remotely to install changes. For instance, Windows has this kind of backdoor. So Microsoft can change the software whenever it likes. This is because of special code in Windows to do this. With software as a service, the server operator obviously can install different software whenever he likes. So it's the same result, but without requiring any special code to do it. It falls out automatically from the architecture of the system. So software as a service is automatically equivalent to a proprietary program with spyware and a backdoor. You must not use it. You must not use proprietary software, and you must not use software as a service if you want to have freedom. The last of these threats to our freedom in a digital society comes from the war on sharing. You see, digital information technology makes it easy to copy and manipulate information. In particular, it's ideal for sharing copies of published works. Digital technology makes this so easy and so useful that just about everyone wants to do it. But there are some who don't want to let us do it. The publishers, typically big companies, want to restrict us. They want to stop us from sharing. And they will do almost anything to stop us. They pay for nasty laws that punish people for sharing. They sue teenagers for hundreds of thousands of dollars. They pressure for the redesign of computers so that they're designed specifically to restrict us. The PCs being sold today are mostly designed specifically to restrict us. That's what they're for. This is known, well, they call it trusted computing, we call it treacherous computing. And this is found in desktops and laptops that are being sold now. For instance, you'll find that they tend not to make analog video outputs anymore, because the output is meant to go to a special monitor which receives an encrypted digital signal. And the purpose of that encrypted digital signal is just to restrict us. The latest tactic they have is the 3 strikes system, where people are punished by disconnection from the internet. The whole family gets disconnected, of course, or the whole house, not just the individual. And typically they do this based on accusations, they don't bother to verify the truth of these accusations. If the movie companies or record companies say that they believe you were sharing with other people, then you get disconnected. What's clear is the governments that do this are the enemies of their own citizens. They don't represent the people. They don't want to serve the people. They work for mega corporations. And their purpose is to impose the power of the corporate empire on the people. They're governments of occupation. One tactic that the mega corporations use to restrict us is digital handcuffs. But programmers are clever. Programmers in the free world have figured out ways to break the digital handcuffs in many cases. Since the mega corporations couldn't stand for that, they told our governments to make it illegal to break the digital handcuffs and illegal to tell people how. And this means that there are many formats for publication and distribution of published works which are secret, and they're secret for the specific purpose of restricting people. This started with DVDs. The format of a video in a DVD was originally secret. It was a secret encryption that was designed specifically to restrict people. The movie companies got together with some technology companies and designed this secret format, and then they said anyone that wants to manufacture a DVD player has to join the conspiracy and promise to make their DVD players restrict the users just like all other DVD players. And that's why all the DVD players restrict people the same way. And that worked for a while, and then people figured out the format and published a free program that could be used to watch the video on a DVD. So the movie companies paid the US government to pass a law to make that software illegal. And then it was extended to the European Union and various other countries. In France, possession of a copy of that program is a crime punished by imprisonment. Nonetheless, that program is easy to get. It's all over. Lots of people have it. You could find it if you wish. And if you don't use that program, you should not ever use an encrypted DVD, because you should never accept a product designed to attack your freedom unless you personally have the means to defeat the restrictions, to break the digital handcuffs. Now, since I go to France, I don't have a copy of that program, and I never use encrypted DVDs, and I don't have any. I have a few DVDs, and they are not encrypted. I checked before I bought them. For instance, in India, I bought some DVDs of Indian classical dance. And someone else went to the store with me and verified they were not encrypted, and then I bought it. However, the movie companies, despite the laws they've obtained and keep on obtaining in more countries that obey the empire, they know they can't make this program disappear. So they designed a new system to restrict people, which is called AACS. And that's what's used in Blu-ray discs. But the Blu-ray discs have another level of digital restrictions management. The movie companies thought that AACS would never be broken, but it was broken. However, part of the technology to break it involves knowing the right key to use. And when people found out the key and it was published, they changed the key. So I think at present, there's actually no way to defeat those digital handcuffs. So Blu-ray discs are poison, and we have to refuse them completely. Now, we've also seen DRM in music. And nowadays, the most common form is something called Spotify, which is a service that requires you, that lets you listen to music over the internet. Well, that's okay, I suppose, but it only works if you run a proprietary program, and that proprietary program is specifically designed to restrict you, because it refuses to save the data in a file on your disk, which would be the easiest and most natural thing in the world to do. But it's designed to refuse to do that for the sole purpose of making your life inconvenient. Anyway, you should never use a proprietary program, and you should never use a product designed to restrict you. So we need to spread the word. Spotify is not a new model of how to listen to music. It's just another attempt to restrict us, and don't stand for it. We also see digital handcuffs and the war on sharing impinging on books. Among the traditional freedoms of readers, we can identify the freedom to buy a book anonymously by paying cash, the freedom to give the book to somebody else, to lend it to your friend, to sell the book to a used bookstore, and also the freedom to keep the book as long as you wish. The Amazon swindle takes away all of these freedoms. Now, I've already covered the surveillance feature and the list of what books people bought. I covered the back door that doesn't let people keep their books. It's the digital handcuffs that stop people from giving away their books, lending their books, and reselling their books. So imagine if you went to your friend's house and there were no books. And it's not that your friend doesn't read, it's that your friend has started reading books through an Amazon swindle, and you can't browse through them. You can't possibly ask him to lend you one, because the only way he could lend you a book is to lend you his whole library, and obviously that's too much to ask. So that's the end of friendship among readers. So make sure all your friends know in advance, before they consider using this malicious product, that it would mean ending their friendships. That way, they may know better than to do this. They may decide to preserve their friendships if they realize this is the consequence it would have. So, to end the war on sharing means legalizing sharing. We have to put an end to these nasty attempts to call sharing piracy or theft, because sharing is good. And I've proposed new ways to support artists much better than the present system, while legalizing sharing. Two methods I've proposed are one based on taxes and the other based on voluntary payments. First, the one that works through taxes. You collect some money, perhaps out of general taxes, perhaps by a special tax on internet connections or blank discs, and then you distribute this money entirely to artists, the people who creatively participate in making the works that people look at or listen to or whatever. And the way that you decide how to distribute it is based on the popularity of each artist, but not in linear proportion. If we do it in linear proportion, we will use the money inefficiently. Suppose superstar A is 1,000 times as popular as fairly successful artist B. Well, if we distribute the money linearly, A will get 1,000 times as much money as B. Which means that if we want to make these many reasonably successful artists, if we want to give them enough money to live on, we're going to have to make each superstar tremendously rich. Which means most of our money will be going to the superstars, and the system will do a bad job of supporting, will be very inefficient for supporting the artists that really need it. So what I propose is use the cube root or some function like that, which rises fast and then rises more slowly. This way, if A is 1,000 times as popular as B, A will get 10 times as much money as B, because the cube root of 1,000 is 10. So this way, each superstar will still get more than the less popular artists, but not so much more. Most of the money will go to support the fairly successful artists, and a small fraction of it will go to the superstars, meaning that our money will be spent efficiently to support the arts. So with less money than we spend now, we can support the arts and the artists much better than we support them now. The current system, in fact, is itself very much biased towards superstars. Actually, first of all, it supports the companies, and it also supports the superstars pretty well, and everybody else, they get very little. So we, in fact, have a pretty lousy system now. And this system would probably work a lot better than the existing system, while also allowing sharing. The other proposal I've made is for voluntary payments. The idea is that every player would have a button you could use to send a certain amount of money to the artists that made the work you're currently playing or the last one you played. And in most of Europe, €1 might be a good amount to send, but here maybe people have less money, so we should make it somewhat less, like maybe 10 euro cents would be a good amount. And you can push the button or not. It's totally up to you. Nothing, you're not punished, you're not compelled, you're just invited to send some money to the artists. But why not? It's not a lot of money, and most people could send that much and not miss it. But there are some poor people who really can't afford to send that money, and they won't. And that's okay. We don't have to squeeze money out of the poor people to support the artists. There are enough non-poor people who can easily afford it. In fact, why don't you send 10 euro cents to the musicians when you listen to a song? Because it's too much work. It would be hard. And then if you send such a small amount of money, the artist would be lucky to receive even half of it, because the payment systems are not efficient for that amount of money. And you'd have to have a credit card to do it. A lot of people don't have credit cards. So it's possible today, but it's so much of a hassle that people will rarely do it. Nonetheless, a number of musicians are now supporting themselves through voluntary payments from their fans. Of course, they're not small voluntary payments. They get bigger payments. Like maybe they sell you something at a concert after, in addition to the ticket to hear the concert, there are all sorts of things they sell. You could buy, depending on how much you want to give, you could buy this or that or that. And some of them are creative and they say, for $1,000, I'll spend a weekend with you. And, oh, well, that probably doesn't happen very often, but if it happens a few times a year, it really helps. So they can have all different levels of how much to contribute and what you'll get. Wait, I thought Wikipedia does use OGG.
YouTube.
Well, actually, there's progress, and the reason is Google bought a company that designed the VP8 format and has released free software to play it and make it. So, and in some cases, namely for high definition video, YouTube now uses VP8. So that solves the problem. VP8 is more advanced than OGG Theora, and why should we insist on the older format if the newer format's good too? But YouTube does not use VP8 for all video, only for high definition video. So it's okay in that one case. I hope they'll switch the other cases too.
That's what I hope as well. Thanks.
But in the meantime, we need somebody to develop a recipe or a script for converting a lower definition video to high definition so that you can then put it on YouTube and it'll use VP8, because that's the only way you could put something on YouTube without working against the free software community.
I read your article about cloud computing, and you recommend that it's not a good thing.
Actually, no. I didn't ever write an article about cloud computing. I made a statement about 2 years ago, a very short statement that was in an interview, saying that cloud computing was bad, and later I regretted it because I realized the term cloud computing is so vague that you should never say anything about it, and I don't use that term. There are so many different things lumped together in that term, and some of them are bad and some are okay, so I won't make any statement about it. I published an article a couple of months ago, and I didn't use that term. I used the term software as a service. That article explains why software as a service is bad.
It was my bad. I was referring to that article. Is it good to be used this software as a service by Linux?
First of all, you can't use anything with Linux, because Linux by itself won't run. Linux is a specific program, it's a kernel, and it's one component of an operating system. Now, the system you're probably thinking of using is the GNU system together with Linux. So that's the main free operating system that exists today, and you should certainly use a free operating system, either that one or some other one. But no matter what operating system you're running, software as a service is always bad, because it always means you lose control of your computing.
Okay, I have two unrelated questions. First one, what do you think about the fact that not all people want to assemble their car, they just want to buy from us?
Sorry, not all people want to what?
To self-assemble.
What does that mean, to self-assemble? You mean to come together out of, you know, a few fingers and a few toes and bones and...
Yeah, well, maybe I think that just want to buy a car from some company like Ferrari or so.
That's, sure, but what's that got to do with the question? Why shouldn't they? You know, free software means you're free to study and change the source code, but that's not a requirement. You know, you can buy a computer that comes to you with free software and use that. You don't have to ever study the source code unless you choose to. And also, by the way, if you don't know how, but it's really important to you to change it, you can pay any programmer to change it for you. You can choose who to pay. This is a free market. So even the people and organizations that don't have any programming skill can take advantage of this freedom indirectly by paying somebody else to do it for them.
Okay, the second one is, what do you think about the Pirate Party in
Well,
Poland?
I have been saying for many years, reject the propaganda term pirate. So when people ask me what I think of piracy, I say, attacking from ships is very bad. In other words, I reject the idea that sharing is piracy, because piracy is attacking from ships and that's bad, and sharing is good, so I won't call them by the same name. But the Pirate Party represents an attempt to turn the term around, to make it a badge of defiance. And I wish them success, and I'm not against it. So if you want to talk about, if you want to help them turn the term around, please do, but don't ever use the term in any other way to refer to sharing. Now, as for the program of the pirate parties, they're different. The Swedish Pirate Party, which was the first one, adopted a program which overall I mostly agree with, but in one ironic, surprising way, it backfires and hurts free software. So I propose some changes they could make to avoid that problem. And so far they haven't listened, but a couple of other Pirate Party organizers from other countries have spoken with me and worked out programs that I could agree with. They asked my advice. I'm not a member of those parties. But there's another thing that I'm disappointed with in the pirate parties, which is that they are very firmly refusing to take a stand on any other issues except those relating to the freedom to share and, in general, freedom of use of the internet and surveillance against surveillance. But they don't take a stand to stop global warming, for instance. And that's also a tremendously important issue. We could have tens or even hundreds of millions of people fleeing from areas that are uninhabitable in a few decades. Large areas could be submerged. Not here, I suppose. You're too far above sea level, but in Bangladesh, areas where millions of people live are likely to be submerged because of rising seas caused by global warming. And all the coral reefs in the world could be killed off by the carbon dioxide that's making the ocean more acidic. And with that, a large fraction of the fish species in the world, a large fraction of the ocean resources that we eat, and areas could become uninhabitably hot. So I'm not, in fact, a supporter of the pirate parties, but I agree mostly with the things they say.
You described two systems for rewarding the artists.
I don't say rewarding, I say supporting.
Okay, supporting. One based on taxes and one based on pushing buttons of
Voluntary payments.
voluntary payment. Do you think that they can be used for supporting programmers as well? Because
It's hard to use these, it's harder to do this to support programmers, and the reason is, in free software, it's common to have hundreds or even thousands maybe of people who contributed to to one program, and to figure out how this money should be divided among them is extremely hard. Fortunately, free software is, a lot of free software is getting developed anyway.
I have a similar question, and in order to make it, I will have to give an example with Wikipedia. The payment system with Wikipedia, you have they need 2 million, for example. So you give your part of donation, and then the bar tells you, okay, it's finished. We have all the money that we need. Is there a possibility to create a system where you can verify the amount of money? Because that's...
I have no idea. But basically, charitable organizations have to file reports to the government about their income. And they do get audited every year in the US, for instance. Like the Free Software Foundation gets audited every year. I'm pretty sure that the Wikimedia Foundation gets audited every year too. So if they have lied, it'll be found out, it'll be reported. So I'm sure that they're telling the truth about these things.
So if they put, because I know that Wikipedia put the documents online, and you can watch their income and everything. So if they lie there, then the government would...
Yeah, because you see, they're having accountants check their books every year.
A few days ago, Google announced that it's abandoning Windows operating systems.
Well, that's wise. Unfortunately, they are still using Macintosh, which is also a malicious system.
Yes, but there are assumptions that they will use Macintosh or gnu+linux.
Well, I mean, I'm glad for them if they do.
If they decide for gnu+linux, what do you think about it?
Well, everybody ought to insist on free software. So it's not good for Google that it's using non-free software, and if it stops, that's good for Google. And I'm happy for them in that, because everybody deserves to have free software. Now, this would not, if they use free software, it's their gain, and if they don't use free software, it's their loss. They're not doing us a favor. They're doing themselves a favor, which they're welcome to do, and we invite them to do for themselves. We invite everybody to do that, but we have to recognize that using free software is not a big contribution to us.
Yeah, no.
Google contributes in other ways, though. Consider, for instance, VP8 format. However, they're also things that Google does that are bad that it shouldn't do. For instance, many Google services try to install a non-free program in the user's computer. This program is written in JavaScript. But so what? It still should be free software. They shouldn't be sending you a non-free program.
That was my second question. When do you think there will be a restriction, should I say, or a blockade? For example, proprietary software companies not to use free software.
I don't understand.
Let me put it this way. Hotmail runs on Gmail and FreeBSD. If
Okay.
they want to be bad, should they use other people's work?
I don't think it would be any better if they used proprietary software, which of course they could write. Now, but I'm not saying that I don't know if Hotmail is particularly bad either. After all, it's not a program, it's a service, a different kind of thing entirely. What's good or bad about Hotmail? Basically, how it treats the user's data is what's good or bad. And I don't know the facts about that. I don't know.
That was just an example. But if, for example, if Microsoft decides to be bad, they
Well,
should write their own code.
well, I think that it would be self-defeating to do that. In general, we would hurt ourselves much more than we would hurt them. And part of the reason is that it would mean giving up freedom zero. It would mean having restrictions on the use of programs. And if we accepted programs whose use is restricted, it would destroy the free software community.
I just wanted to know what kind of operating system do you use?
I use the gnu+linux operating system. Specifically, I use gnu+linux, which is one of the totally free distributions. There are maybe 1,000 distributions of gnu/linux, and most of them, I'm sad to say, contain some proprietary software, because the people who develop them do not make freedom the primary value. But there are a few distros that are entirely free, such as gnu+linux is one of them. The list of these can be found in gnu.org/distros. Now, on this particular machine, which has a MIPS processor, the only free distro that runs is gnu+linux. On PCs, there are other free distros that run.
So the voluntary payment to support artists should be like usable with a button in each place. Will it be like, that was like your idea basically. How could an organization be organized that takes care about those voluntary payments without taking like track of who is listening to who?
Well, the technology exists for this. It's not hard in any technical sense. To implement that system is a social and business problem. It's not a technical problem.
No, that's not what I mean, but it shouldn't be like trackable who is listening to what.
Right.
And
Indeed.
government should
Exactly.
know that.
Indeed, how to do that kind of anonymous payment is already known.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah, speak.
You were making the point that software as a service basically gives us all the bad attributes of proprietary software. In your view, where do you make the distinction between services on the internet and software as a service?
Well, okay, let me say. Software as a service is a kind of service which is equivalent to giving you a program to run.
So
In other words, it's doing your computing on data that you provide. There are many other kinds of services in the internet which don't fit that description. Consider, for instance, a search engine. There, the job it's doing is searching through somebody else's data. That's not the kind of computing you could even conceivably do in your own computer. And then there are a lot of services that do various kinds of communication and publication. E-commerce is a kind of communication, for instance. That's not your own computing in a personal sense. That's joint computing. So this is not software as a service.
Okay. As a follow-on question, if you look at services, I think you could consider like Google Documents, for instance, as a software as a service.
Yes, Google Docs is software as a service.
Particularly when it's used by individuals. But you do have some advantages that are difficult to reproduce in an individual software environment. Do you have any thoughts on how you could
First of all,
restructure things to address that?
you've got to protect your freedom and not give it up for some convenience. So if somebody invited me to use Google Docs, I would simply say, no, that would take away my freedom. I won't do it. And I will be totally firm. And by the way, Google Docs also installs a JavaScript program that's half a meg, and I don't think it will work without that. So that's another reason to refuse to use it. But but we could obviously develop peer-to-peer software that would do the same job.
Yeah, I mean, part of the advantages are you know, that you only have to use a browser and
So what?
All the documents are available online to everyone simultaneously.
Well, that basically means you're letting yourself be helpless.
Yeah.
So I don't want to have my data stored in some company and access it through a browser.
Mr. Stallman, thank you for the perfect speech. From your practice on the use of free software, I would like to know your opinion about what's the best way of spreading the use of free and open source software in Kosovo.
Well, I'm not concerned. I don't actually work for open source software. I didn't explain this, but open source is a totally different philosophy from free software. I told you the philosophy of free software, which is about respect for the user's freedom. Open source, the term, was invented in 1998 by people in the free software community who didn't want to talk about freedom. They didn't want to present it as an ethical issue of, you know, free software is ethical and proprietary software is evil, which is what we say. So they invented a new term, and because it was a new term, they could decide which ideas to mention and which to leave out. And they left out the entire ethical level of the issue, that the reasons why proprietary software was an injustice. And instead, they only recommend letting people share and change software, saying that that way you'll get software of higher technical quality. Well, I think it's nice to have software that's more reliable, but that's not as important as freedom. So that's a secondary issue. So free software and open source at the level of values are totally different. For us, the primary values are freedom and community, and for them, the primary values are powerful, reliable software. In other words, convenience. So people will talk about free / libre and open source software as a way of mentioning both movements without taking a side between them. And for some purposes, the philosophy may not even be relevant. But for me, the philosophy is the most important thing. Teaching people to value their freedom is absolutely crucial to protecting freedom. So I am not for free software and open source. I'm for free software. I'm for software that respects our freedom. So I don't want to answer the question in terms of open source. What's the best way to promote free software, the use of free software? Well, you can do it by giving talks, explaining the issue of freedom, explaining how with proprietary software, somebody who owns the program has power over you, and show how they use this power in malicious ways. And the solution is to reclaim control over the software we use, take it away from them. And the way in practice that we can do this is by rejecting their software and using free software only. Of course, it also helps to teach other people how to use the system, help them install the system, the various things that user groups do. And we will need people's help. Kosovo will need people's help in migrating the schools to free software, which is a very important thing to do in encouraging people in the future to use free software. That's tremendously effective. If the schools are teaching free software, then to a large extent, it's downhill from there.
In this regard, first of all, thank you very much for this free presentation. It made us felt free for 2 hours. And you said that you had a meeting today with the Minister of Education. So what's your impression? Did he take your recommendation and advice seriously?
Oh yes, he's definitely concerned and interested, but of course I'm not even a citizen here, so there's no reason he should make any promises to me.
That's the impression. And are there some other places or countries where your recommendations are taken and implemented?
Yes, Ecuador began a couple of years ago to migrate the public agencies to free software in a systematic, carefully planned method. And they've made a lot of progress. And now they're planning how to move the school system to free software.
I would like to ask about the government, national governments. If Microsoft comes and buys corrupt officials or whatever, make some contacts. No, I wanted your opinion. What's the way for open software activists and...
I'm not an open software activist. I'm an activist for free software and freedom.
I didn't say for you. I said what's the way for open source and open software activists to counterbalance this activity of a very big corporation?
There's nothing I can say to give advice to those people who fundamentally disagree with my philosophy. What I say is always in the name of free software, and it's addressed to people who care about free software. There's not, if you presume that we're talking to people who reject my views, there's no point in my talking to them very much. So I don't have nothing to say to open source people, except if they're interested, I'll say why I have different views. Now, we all want to support politicians that are honest. It's often not easy to see which politicians are honest. So I can suggest, there are some. I can suggest a method, and that is the politicians who give strong support to the adoption of free software and helping free software thrive have resisted a company with a lot of money on hand, which shows that they have the ability to resist, and maybe they'll resist other companies with less money on hand. So we can use, I mean, obviously free software is not the only important political issue in life. It's not the most important one, but it can be our diagnostic, because when people resist all the money on the side of proprietary software and strongly support the adoption of free software, that shows they have the ability to resist a lot of money. So those are people you should consider voting for. Yeah, but in a lot of parts of the world there are some. The point is, don't be defeatist. There's plenty of reason to be skeptical. There's plenty of reason to suspect wrongdoing among politicians, but if you take it to the point of being defeatist, then you cease to be a force for anything.
Any more questions? Yes? No? I guess we're done. Okay, thank you very
Yeah.
much for coming over. There are still some stickers, my favorite ones, iPad over there. Please go to plus.org for so please go to plus. Okay, good.